Welcome. I thank you all for accepting the invitation to my humble home. I shall formally address myself as RPGist, and I hope you shall do me the courtesy to address me as such. What you see is the domain in which I perceive the world of RPGs. The being you see in front of you is the virtual personification of myself, so that we may have a domain for discussion of a similar passion. I consider myself, albeit a self-proclaimed connoisseur for RPGs, as I've completed more than 200 titles. Today, I've invited you to discuss an RPG I personally loathe. One of the worst RPGs I've recently played this year, and perhaps of all time. The reason I despise this game isn't because of bad turn-based mechanics. In fact, it plays pretty well. However, what I truly despise about the game is that Piece Odyssey is a soulless RPG without a plot. The story begins with an opening shot focused on a badly damaged pirate ship. It's half sunk beneath the ocean, near the beach, where Luffy, lying unconscious, is awakened by his remaining crew, who are then immediately assaulted by a hailstorm of electrified blocks of ice. What could have caused such a strange anomaly on this mysterious island? After narrowly avoiding death by impalement, Sanji notices that Nami is missing. After a quick accounting, Chopper then announces that Zoro and Brooks are also missing. Luffy quickly organizes a search party for their missing crew as the electrified hail dissipates. We immediately start off the adventure with a bombardment of many tutorial screens for obvious mechanics, followed by a massive shriek. The crew discovers Nami and Zoro being assaulted by a massive ape and rush to their rescue. A battle commences, followed by another tutorial on how to use a mechanic designed long before I was even born. The crew kicks, slashes, and slaps the big ape until it falls down. With Sanji overjoyed with the reunion, the crew continues their expedition onto the mysterious island. As they walk through the South Forest, a rumbling is heard. A mysterious object can be seen flying from the horizon. As it draws closer, it drops in front of the crew, releasing a wave of inferno. The mysterious Colossus summons a weapon and assaults the crew. Amidst the confusion from the battle, a girl casually walks by and touches each party member. After finishing with Luffy, cubes of light suddenly emerges from their bodies and scatters into the air. The Fire Colossus reawakens, and the crew takes a combat stance against it. Luffy quickly prepares a special, but finds he cannot remember how to do it. Suddenly ill-equipped, the crew is saved by a mysterious man who swoops in and fires his pistols, protecting the crew from incoming projectiles, allowing them to escape. The crew follows the mysterious man to his hut, where they encounter a girl named Lim, who explains that whenever she touches someone, she transforms their powers and memories into cubes to pacify them. In order for the crew to regain their powers, they need to recover the cubes that Lim scattered. After rallying his crew to look for the cubes, Audio volunteers to help and has the Straw Hats follow him to the Thunderhead ruins. The crew enters the ancient ruin, where they march into the innermost chamber, encountering the Thunder Colossus. Luffy battles the Colossus, gun-punching and throwing basic punches until the Thunder Colossus is eventually defeated. Deactivated, the Colossus disperses its stored cubes into the air and showers them upon the crew, thus restoring a portion of the crew's abilities. The battle concluded, Audio bends over and picks up a mysterious orb. Luffy inquires about the orb, and Audio explains that it may be the key to exploring the mysterious island of Wayford. With only a small portion of their abilities restored, the crew returns to Lim for her aid. At the behest of Audio, Lim demands a cube be handed to her and activates it, releasing a flash of light summoning the crew to a world between worlds Lim called the World of Memory. Lim explains that the crew must follow their previous accomplishments and repeat them in order to regain their real strength. However, a world built from their memories will create a parallel variance of it. Lim then conjures the cubes and begins transporting them, thus beginning Chapter 2, Alabasta. Chapter 2 begins with the crew transported to the kingdom of Alabasta at Port Nanahana. Lim inquires what kind of adventure they had here, and the crew reminiscences about the villainous organization they fought, led by Croc, and the numerous atrocities he committed. Confirming that defeating Croc was their biggest accomplishment, Lim explains the mechanics of the memory cube and that the world of Alabasta was created from their memories, with a slight variation. This is because, throughout their adventures, the Straw Hats have faced many encounters and have grown stronger as a result. However, their growth and their strength affected how they perceived their enemies, and in combination of their weakened state, they've unintentionally scaled their enemies accordingly. In other words, we're playing an abridged recap episode. Before we continue, a brief intermission to address a few things. It seems the writers are using recap scenarios from the anime to fill various points of the story. It's important to note that organizing an RPG campaign based on pre-established story arcs from a different medium suffers from severe limitations that needs to be reformatted through creative liberties. It is unfortunate that the writers handled this chapter in the worst way possible, and here's why. First example is that we immediately began our chapter by hounding 3 NPCs for information to confirm Croc's location. Only we never actually get to it. In spite of narrowing Croc's location down to the rain base, the plot immediately derails by sending the crew on a fetch quest to obtain medicine for a collapsed freeloader. It's mandatory whether we like it or not, and so we hound another NPC for medicine and discover, of course, it was taken by one of Croc's men. So the crew tracks him down and kicks him to reclaim the medicine. Upon recovery, they deliver it back to the merchant, who gives us a special energy apple for the collapsed freeloader, who then in turn gives the crew the key needed to unlock the gate. Funnily enough, after about an hour of backtracking and fetching, the crew completely forgets what their objective even was until Nami reminds us. Unfortunately, the long fetch quest does not end there, as the crew needs rations to cross the desert. And so, they take up another fetch quest, with the restaurant's cook to kill some scorpions out in the desert and cook the ingredients for the chef who judges Sanju's cooking, admits defeat, thus giving us the rations that will finally let us kick off this adventure. Now that we're finally back on track, the crew constantly needs to remind us what we're supposed to be doing as we move forward. It's becoming increasingly evident that the story for this chapter is really just a background prop. I mean, after about an hour, I've yet to encounter this dastardly villain Croc, or anyone related to him, as well as whoever this VV is. But the larger problem is that the writers seem to have written an abridged recap episode that recaps itself constantly, because it constantly derails. There's honestly no plot to cover here. For example, the chapter derails 4 more times by transporting Usopp into a memory within a memory, has us retrieve Nami's stolen wallet, gets detoured because Luffy collapsed the cave en route to the rain base, and finally, after defeating Croc, you have to retrieve your party members. What a disrespect to the time gamers have on this earth. Chapter 2 ends and Chapter 3 begins. Chapter 3 begins after furthering their strength. The crew approaches Audio to begin their expedition for the next Colossus, located in the Dust Ruins. As they approach the ruins, Audio reveals the orb they acquired from the Thunder Colossus and places it in the pedestal, removing the barrier, allowing entry into the Dust Ruins. The crew steps inside the dusty ruin. However, they are immediately stopped by a sandstorm? Well, at least Luffy has an idea. So the crew backtracks to Lim and, oh no, please no, 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 no. No!
1 hour later.
After keepifying the crab for transportation, the crew... Are you serious? Another backtrack later. Returning to the dust rooms, Lim releases the carrier crab to traverse through the sandstorm. After a wacky ride at poor Usopp's expense, the crew presses onward through the dust room, solving its many tricky puzzles to obtain the emblems needed to reveal the hidden staircase, allowing them to proceed towards the Wind Colossus. Entering into its final chamber, the crew confronts the Wind Colossus and battles it to the death. The battle was long and hard fought, but after sustaining, dealing, stealing, and healing many blows, the crew combines all their united strength and defeats the Wind Colossus, restoring a portion of their powers and obtaining the Wind Orb. The crew returns to Lim at Audio's hut, bringing news of their success and to recall their next adventure. Lim holds up her cube, previewing their next adventure, and transports them into the memory cube, thus ending Chapter 3 and beginning Chapter 4. The crew appears in the familiar port city that is Water 7. The camera focuses on the Mary for a brief moment to emphasize Usopp's sentimentality about the ship, who then announces that he will stay behind. Meanwhile, the crew selects Rob Lousy, or rather the Pigeon Dude, as their next target. Discerning the timing of their arrival, Zoro concludes that the Pigeon is still a ship carpenter, and so they head to the Galila Company in search of him, by taking a boat, then walking the rest of the way. Arriving at the dockyard, the crew walks into the Ohatsu cafeteria to make an inquiry to Granny Hatsu for the Pigeon Man's whereabouts. However, she stubbornly refuses to talk unless we find her 2 missing employees. No. Realizing the search was a waste of time, the crew continues the hunt at the mayor's mansion for the Pigeon Man. However, they are stopped by Aokiji, who overshadows the crew with his massive stature. He glances at the crew for a brief moment and focuses in on Robin. He then activates his cryokinetic powers by stomping the ground, freezing Robin on the spot, and announces his hostile intent towards the crew. The crew attempts to repel Aokiji. However, their attacks prove ineffective against their formidable adversary, who then retaliates with a massive Ice Age attack, downing Zoro and freezing the rest. Completely outmatched, the crew takes Robin and flees while Luffy tries to hold Aokiji back. After stabilizing Robin's condition, Zoro and Sanji returns for Luffy, but finds him frozen solid. Sanji decides they should take Luffy back to the Mary and use its medical facilities to thaw Luffy. Thus, Zoro and Sanji run all the way back to the ship from the opposite side of the map. Sanji and Zoro finally catch up with the others. However, their ship is missing along with Usopp. Suddenly, the thieves responsible for the theft of their ship returns to the scene of their crime and announces their intent to collect the bounty on the Straw Hats, thus escalating an altercation that results in the crew quickly knocking them out and repelling their attackers. Their fleeing attackers stupidly announce their affiliation with Frankie as they flee in promised retaliation. Their attackers repelled, the crew focuses on their immediate attention on Luffy's condition, and so they decide to seek out medical treatment back in town, where we just emerged from. Can I just fast travel? Of course not. And so we run all the way back to the boats to backtrack to the city. Upon arrival, the crew poses for a bit and decides on a bathhouse to thaw Luffy and Robin. And so we backtrack to the opposite side of the map until we eventually find a bathhouse. However, their custodians refuses the crew entry until the city mayor Iceberg emerges and helps the crew. Upon restoration, the mayor Iceberg divulges information on Frankie's hideout so they can retrieve the ship and Usopp. No more, I've made my case. At this point, you might have realized the story is completely unfocused, and I suspect it's by design. Every plot thus far has the crew getting sidetracked one way or the other. Henceforth, in the face of overwhelming evidence presented, I conclude this game has no story to tell. I suspect the writers, for any number of reasons, feared botching a story based on the main series, so instead tried to create a one-off campaign unrelated to the canon source material. However, they could not write a plot to commit, so instead used the source material to fill the plot, only for them failing to commit to even that. No effort was provided for the plot, thus creating a soulless story with no direction. For example, if we separate the odd number chapters in which the crew battles the Colossuses to reclaim their powers from the even number recap chapters, there is nothing. The crew, or rather the heroes, are just trying to reclaim their abilities without an overarching objective. Without an overarching objective, there is no villain to contest an objective with to create conflict. Although generic, the most tested method to build a campaign for an RPG is to have an objective the hero must contest the villain over. This sets the rules of escalation for both the hero and villain as they contest the same objective with a different end goal in mind. As they both grow closer to achieving their objectives, their conflict builds from minor skirmishes to outright hostilities, eventually culminating to a climactic confrontation where the victor is ultimately decided. Throughout the 4 chapters I've presented, no overarching villain has been established, except Audio through process of elimination. The problem is, Audio will announce his betrayal at the climax of a plot, and only then will he serve as the villain. Thus, he is unable to build escalation since the story is coming to a close. Without a villain, there is no escalation to build a meaningful conflict to focus the plot on. A story with no contested objectives cannot create a conflict to escalate, hence provides no direction, is why Piece Odyssey is an RPG without a plot.